Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with another episode of Great Artist, Bad Day. Actually, this was a series of bad days. The artist in question is Riccardo Muti, and the recording in question, recordings actually, is his Philadelphia, or are his Philadelphia, is his Philadelphia Beethoven cycle. It's an is. The recordings are and is. There we go. I got it straight, I think. Look, Muti was a tremendous conductor. He still is. He's alive. I mean, he's sort of fading, I think, a little bit, but he's out there. And he made astonishing records. And I remember vividly just how thrilling it was when he first got to Philadelphia, because we had become used to the Ormandy sound, which was voluptuous and gorgeous. It was wonderful, of course, in its way, of its type. But he showed up and he did the Rite of Spring. And he did this, just insanely exciting, brilliantly played, letting that orchestra really cut loose with a rhythmic ferocity that Ormandy would never have sanctioned. It just wasn't his style. So it was exciting. It was really exciting. And Ormandy had said he selected Muti because he wanted something totally different. He didn't want another Ormandy. It was time to move on. And also possibly to show how much better Ormandy had been than anyone who came later, which he also kind of achieved. Anyway, Muti made some very fine recordings in Philly. He made some fairly uninteresting recordings in Philly. He had made a huge body of splendid recordings with the Philharmonia, all for EMI, which was recording him at the time. And then he did this Beethoven cycle. And we were looking forward to it. We really were. He waited. I mean, he had done some Beethoven before, and it was good. Individual recordings. I think, didn't he do the seventh? I did something or else. But, he was not a complete stranger to Beethoven. His style promised to be very exciting in Beethoven. That is that it rhythmically strict, but at the same time passionate and impetuous, forward momentum, the kind of stuff he did with Verdi. He was a great conductor. And we were really looking forward to his Beethoven. So out comes the box of the Beethoven symphonies, and they were just completely uninteresting. I mean, as usual, there were problems with the sonics. Muti has always had problems with sonics. He seems to be a conductor who doesn't much care how his records sound. And a lot of his Philharmonia recordings were very average to less than average for their day, however great the performances might have been. And Philadelphia was always a problem. EMI always had issues getting a good sound with that orchestra. And so the sonics were a little dull, let's put it that way. There was just a lack of brilliance, especially on top. There was a certain... The fire wasn't there. It just wasn't there. I mean, especially in the Fifth Symphony and the Seventh, where you really wanted to have the rhythm go. There was this sort of warm, comfortable... I mean, the rhythm... Yes, they were disciplined. Yes, they were rhythmic. I mean, but maybe he was a little intimidated. You began to realize, let's put it this way, that Riccardo Muti was a conductor who had almost no reputation whatsoever in the classical repertoire. None. And it was ironic that this Beethoven was so mediocre because, well, he went on to do a marvelous Schubert cycle in Vienna and make some fabulous Mozart recordings for Philips, now Decca, also in Vienna. But in Beethoven, for some reason... I mean, he acquired a certain facility with classical repertoire, early romantic repertoire, but it seems that his strengths lie in much later stuff, much later music. And I don't really have an answer for why this Beethoven cycle was just so mundane. I mean, that's what it was. It was a great orchestra, sleek, polished, disciplined, respectful, maybe too respectful of the music. I'm not sure. When I listen to the recordings now, I can't put my finger on what exactly is wrong with them from an interpretive point of view. The playing is terrific. It's just that they don't add up to a powerful or compelling musical experience. They just don't. And I think that, if I had to really sit down and take notes and analyze it that way, I could probably come up with some reasons. I do think there is one issue. I think there's an issue that I've managed to, after all these years, because it's bothered me. It's bothered me for decades, since I was in high school, I think I've managed to figure one thing out. The problem is, taken as a cycle, one of the main problems anyway, is that he plays all the music the same. There's not enough differentiation from one work to the next. You don't chart Beethoven's compositional and spiritual growth from one work to the next. He tends to apply the same interpretive gambit in every work. So you know what's coming. They become predictable, monotonous even though individually they're quite good performances. You can't say this tempo's wrong or this interpretation's bizarre or any of those things are happening. They're not. But there's just an insufficient range and variety of texture, of balance, of accent, of all of the things. You don't hear any difference between the First Symphony and the Seventh Symphony. They all come out as this sort of big, strong, muscular, relatively uninteresting composer. It's a shock. It was a shock. It's still a shock. And I also find it very, very interesting that, given the fact that composers who do this stuff tend to redo it, that Muti hasn't remade his Beethoven. He hasn't done a second Beethoven cycle for any label with any particular orchestra. And maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe there's a reason that he spends less and less time in the world of classical music. And why, for example, his best recordings of that period are cherubini. They are, first of all, vocal works, the masses, and second of all, a composer who is on the cusp of classical and romanticism and who represents a certain conservative, restrained romanticism or late classicism that responds very well to Muti's brand, his brand of discipline and interpretation, I guess. I don't know. I'm just puzzled. It was a big disappointment to me. It still is. But maybe I've been able, through this particular form of group therapy, to express a little bit of why I feel that way. He was a great artist, and he had some really bad days when it came to Beethoven. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.